She stepped outside like any other day and vanished forever. It was supposed to be one of those boring, normal mornings that nobody remembers. The kind of day where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. The kind of day people don't write books about or make documentaries on. The kind of day that starts with coffee getting cold on the kitchen counter and ends with dinner plans that never happen. But this morning didn't end that way because somewhere between the front door clicking shut and the sun climbing higher in the sky, a woman walked out of her house and vanished so completely that decades later, cops, journalists, armchair detectives, and straight-up conspiracy addicts are still asking the same question in hushed voices like the answer might hear them. How does a grown adult just disappear in America without a trace? No struggle, no blood, no screaming neighbors, no frantic phone call, no goodbye note taped to the fridge, just a front door that closed behind her like it always had, and a life that stopped existing the second she crossed that threshold. And that's what makes this case so damn terrifying, because it didn't happen in some dark alley or sketchy part of town or off-the-grid cabin in the woods. It happened in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with trimmed lawns and mailboxes lined up like soldiers. The kind where people wave at each other but don't really know each other. The kind of place where you assume you're safe, until you're not. She wasn't running from anything, at least not that anyone knew about. No massive debts, no messy divorce exploding in court. No restraining orders, no stalkers officially on record, no signs she was planning to ghost her entire existence. And that's the part that still messes with investigators, because people who plan to disappear usually leave breadcrumbs. They drain accounts, they sell stuff, they search weird things online. They tell someone something vague like, "I need a fresh start." But she didn't do any of that. She just woke up, got dressed, and walked out like she was heading to the grocery store or going for a short walk. And that casual normalcy is what haunts this story, because it means whatever happened next was fast, unexpected, and final, and nobody saw it coming. Not even her. The last confirmed sighting was painfully ordinary, almost insulting in how unimportant it seemed at the time, because witnesses didn't rush to call police or write anything down. They just remembered it later with that sick feeling in their gut. The feeling you get when you realize you unknowingly watched the last normal moment of someone's life, and by the time people started asking questions, that moment had already slipped into the past. Fuzzy and unreliable, because memory lies, especially when fear creeps in after the fact. And now every detail mattered. What she was wearing, which direction she walked, whether she looked distracted, scared, calm, or lost in her own thoughts. But back then nobody thought to look twice, because why would they? When she didn't come back that night, the assumption was simple. Plans changed. Phone battery died. Maybe she crashed at a friend's place, because adults disappear all the time for harmless reasons, and nobody wants to be the paranoid one who calls the cops too early. But as the hours stacked up and her phone stayed silent, that casual concern started morphing into something heavier, something colder, something that sits in your chest and doesn't move. And that's when the first real question surfaced. Why didn't she tell anyone where she was going? Not a text, not a note, not even a vague comment, just gone. And when police finally got involved, they treated it like a standard missing adult case at first, because adults are allowed to leave, they're allowed to vanish if they want to, unless there's evidence of foul play. And in this case, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. And that absence of evidence became the most disturbing clue of all. Inside the house, everything looked untouched. No overturned furniture, no broken glass, no forced entry, no signs of a struggle. The kind of scene that makes detectives uncomfortable because it gives them nothing to push against, nothing to fight. And they searched anyway, top to bottom. Drawers, closets, trash bins, the places you check even when you know you won't find anything because hope makes you do stupid things, and they found her personal belongings exactly where they should have been. Wallet, ID, keys. The stuff nobody planning a clean escape would ever leave behind. And that single detail alone shattered the runaway theory almost instantly. Because people don't just walk away from their identity unless they want to be found dead or not found at all. And she didn't strike anyone as that kind of person. Her phone activity stopped cold. No outgoing calls, no texts, no pings jumping between towers like she was traveling. Just silence. And silence in a digital age is loud as hell. Because even people trying to disappear usually mess up at least once. They check social media, they log into an email, they call someone out of loneliness. But she didn't. And the longer that silence stretched, the more unsettling it became because it suggested either extreme discipline or something far worse. That she never had the chance to reach for her phone at all. Friends and family were interviewed. And this is where things got murky because everyone described her the same way. Normal, routine-driven, not impulsive, not reckless, not the type to vanish without warning. Which sounds comforting at first until you realize how useless it is because normal people disappear too. And sometimes that makes it harder to find answers, not easier. Because there's no obvious enemy, no dramatic motive, no explosive secret waiting to be exposed, just a quiet life with quiet habits that ended loudly in the worst possible way. Unanswered. As days turned into weeks, tips started pouring in, and with them came the chaos, sightings reported states away, claims from strangers who swore. They saw her at a gas station, a diner, a bus terminal, and every one of those tips lit a tiny spark of hope before being crushed by reality because none of them checked out. None of them stuck, and each dead end made the case colder, heavier, harder to revive. And that's when the theories started mutating because when facts run out, imagination takes over and people hate empty spaces, especially when they're shaped like a missing person. Some said she was abducted in broad daylight, which sounds extreme until you realize how fast something like that can happen, seconds, not minutes, especially if someone knew her routine, especially if she trusted the wrong person, especially if she didn't scream because she didn't have time to. Or because she was stunned, or because fear froze her solid, and that theory scared people the most because it meant this could happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime. No dark alley required, just one wrong interaction at the wrong moment. Others whispered about voluntary disappearance, a secret life, a breaking point nobody saw. But that theory fell apart under scrutiny because disappearing costs money, planning, preparation, and she left behind everything you'd need to start over, and starting over without resources isn't romantic, it's brutal. And nobody who knew her believed she'd choose that path without telling a single soul. Not even in code, not even indirectly. Then there were the darker theories, the ones people don't like to say out loud. The ones that live in late-night forums and anonymous comment sections, theories involving people close to her. Theories involving things that never made it into police reports. Theories built on suspicion rather than proof. And those theories poisoned relationships. Because once doubt enters a circle, it never really leaves, and even innocent people start looking guilty when answers refuse to surface. Search efforts expanded. Volunteers combed through nearby areas, woods, fields, abandoned structures, anywhere a body could be hidden or a clue could rot quietly. And every search ended the same way. Nothing. And that nothing became a character in this story, a silent antagonist mocking everyone involved because how do you search for something that leaves no trace? How do you follow a path that doesn't exist? Media coverage picked up, and with it came pressure. Pressure on police to explain what they couldn't explain. Pressure on family to grieve publicly. Pressure on the public to care long enough for the story not to fade, and for a while it worked. Her face was everywhere, her name echoed through news segments and online discussions. But attention is temporary. Outrage has an expiration date, And eventually newer stories pushed hers aside because the world doesn't stop spinning just because one person vanished, and that might be the cruelest part of all. Years passed and the case went cold, not officially closed, just quietly shelved. The way so many unsolved disappearances are, waiting for a miracle tip, a deathbed confession, a piece of evidence that somehow survived time and decay, and that waiting became a kind of purgatory. Not just for investigators, but for the people who loved her, because closure doesn't exist when there's no ending, only an eternal question mark. And here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. If this could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. Because there was no warning sign, no final argument, no risky lifestyle, no obvious danger. Just a woman who walked out of her house like she had done 1,000 times before, trusting that the world would still be there when she came back. And whatever happened next erased her so thoroughly that even now, nobody can say with certainty whether she's alive or dead, whether she suffered or escaped, whether justice was denied or simply impossible. And the scariest question of all isn't what happened to her. It's how many people saw something and didn't realize it mattered. Because somewhere, someone knows something, even if they don't know they know it. And until that missing piece surfaces, this case remains one of the most chilling reminders that sometimes people don't vanish into thin air. They vanish into silence. Once the initial shock faded and hope started thinning out, investigators did what they always do when a person vanishes without a sound. They built a timeline, minute by minute, step by step, because time doesn't lie the way people do, except in this case, time didn't tell the truth either. It contradicted itself. Bent in weird places, left gaps that shouldn't exist, and those gaps became the most disturbing part of the entire investigation because, according to everything they could verify, she didn't just disappear, she fell off the timeline, like someone reached into reality and erased a chunk of it. And when detectives laid out her last known movements, nothing lined up the way it was supposed to, starting with the fact that no one could agree on when she actually left the house. Because some neighbors thought it was early morning, others swore it was closer to noon. And that difference mattered more than anyone realized at first, because it completely changed who might have crossed her path and what kind of danger she might have been exposed to. Security cameras didn't help, and that alone raised eyebrows because in a neighborhood like hers, there should have been at least something. A door cam, a street cam, a traffic light camera catching her crossing an intersection. But footage was either missing, overwritten, malfunctioning, or pointed just slightly away from where it needed to be. And if you believe in coincidences, this case will test that belief hard, because every camera that should have seen her didn't, and the ones that worked caught everything except her, like she knew exactly where not to walk, which makes no sense unless someone else was guiding her movements or unless the universe was playing a sick joke. Phone records made things worse, not better, because her phone didn't die, it didn't run out of battery, it didn't suddenly lose service, it simply stopped communicating. No final ping, no last tower connection showing movement, no data spike, nothing. And that kind of digital silence usually only happens when a device is intentionally powered down, destroyed, or removed from network range very quickly. And none of those options fit neatly with the idea of a casual walk that turned into a disappearance, because people don't smash their phones while walking down the street unless something has gone very, very wrong. Police traced her usual routes, places she walked to regularly, stores she liked, shortcuts she took, habits she followed almost on autopilot, and that routine made her predictable, which is comforting until you realize predictability is exactly what predators look for. Exactly what someone planning something would exploit, because if you know where someone will be and when, you don't need force, you don't need chaos, you just need timing. And the timing in this case was too perfect, because she vanished during a window so narrow that investigators believe whatever happened took minutes, not hours. And that means it happened fast, quiet, and efficiently. Then came the witness statements. And this is where the case really started to unravel, because witnesses didn't lie outright, but their stories didn't match either. And that inconsistency wasn't dramatic enough to scream cover-up, but it was unsettling enough to keep detectives awake at night, because one person remembered seeing a car parked unusually close to the sidewalk. Another remembered hearing an argument that didn't quite register at the time. Someone else recalled a figure standing too still for too long, like they were waiting. And each memory on its own was weak, forgettable, unreliable. But together they formed something uncomfortable. The suggestion that someone was there, watching, waiting, blending in just enough not to raise alarms. One witness reported seeing her speak briefly with someone she seemed to recognize, and that detail split the investigation in half because recognition changes everything. It means trust, hesitation, lowered defenses, and police tore through her contact list, social circle, co-workers, acquaintances, even people she'd only interacted with once or twice. Because you don't need a deep relationship to be dangerous, you just need familiarity, and yet every lead led nowhere. Alibis checked out, timelines didn't intersect cleanly, and the deeper police dug, the more the case seemed to resist being solved, like it didn't want to give up its secrets. Search areas expanded again based on new theories farther out this time, places she could have been taken rather than walked to. Remote locations, construction sites, industrial zones, waterways. Anywhere evidence could disappear as easily as she had, and dogs were brought in. Trained noses that don't care about lies or bad memories, and for a moment hope spiked when one of them picked up a scent trail that seemed promising. Until it ended abruptly, right near a roadway, like she got into a vehicle. And that single detail shifted the entire narrative from she wandered off to she was intercepted, because scent trails don't just stop for no reason. They stop when movement changes, and that change usually involves wheels. Investigators explored the possibility of a crime of opportunity, someone passing through, someone who didn't live there, someone who would never be connected to her life in any obvious way. And that theory terrified the community because it meant randomness. It meant wrong place, wrong time. It meant safety was an illusion, and that fear spread fast, changing routines, locking doors earlier, watching strangers longer than usual, because nothing unsettles people like realizing the rules they live by don't actually protect them. Then there were the private tips, the quiet ones, the calls that came in late at night, the emails that hinted at things but never said them outright, the kind of tips that feel important but fall apart when examined under light and police chase them anyway. Because in cold cases, even garbage sometimes hides gold. But once again, nothing stuck. No arrests, no charges, no solid suspect to point a finger at. Just a growing pile of theories stacked on top of each other like a Jenga tower waiting to collapse. As months turned into years, the investigation suffered from something worse than lack of evidence. Time. Because time erodes memory, changes landscapes, kills witnesses, and lets small details slip through cracks forever. And detectives rotated off the case. New ones picked it up with fresh eyes but no emotional connection. And with every handoff, a little urgency leaked out. Not because they didn't care, but because unsolved cases quietly teach you that not every mystery gets an answer. And through all of this, one question never stopped echoing in interviews and reports, whispered more than spoken. Why here? Why now? Why her? Because random crime still follows patterns, and nothing about this case screamed random. It screamed precise, deliberate, controlled, and that realization led some investigators to a chilling conclusion. They never said publicly, but hinted at in closed-door discussions. That whoever was responsible didn't panic, didn't leave evidence, didn't rush, and may have done something like this before, or at least planned it like they had. By the end of the second year, the case was technically still open, but functionally frozen, and that's when it crossed the invisible line from active investigation to modern mystery. The kind people dissect online. The kind that spawns documentaries, podcasts, and endless debates because when law enforcement can't answer the question, the public steps in armed with speculation, logic, emotion, and sometimes paranoia. And that's where this story took its next, darker turn. Because the internet doesn't just analyze cases, it rewrites them. By the time the internet fully got its hands on this case, it was already slipping out of law enforcement's control. Not officially, not on paper, but culturally. Because once a disappearance goes cold long enough, it stops belonging to the police and starts belonging to the public, and the public doesn't investigate the way detectives do. They don't care about procedure or probability, they care about patterns, vibes, and the one question cops hate the most. What if you missed something obvious? And that question lit a fire under forums, comment sections, podcasts, and amateur sleuths who pored over every scrap of information like it was a sacred text hiding a secret message. And in that chaos, theories didn't just emerge, they multiplied, mutated, and refused to die no matter how many times they were debunked. The first theory to explode online was the someone close to her angle, because statistically that's where most crimes live. Not with strangers, but with people inside the circle. And once that idea took hold, everyone around her became a suspect in the court of public opinion. Friends, co-workers, neighbors, even people who had been cleared early on. Because the internet doesn't respect clearance, it respects suspicion. And every awkward interview clip, every pause, every poorly worded sentence got dissected like it was evidence of guilt. And suddenly innocent behavior started looking sinister when replayed in slow motion with ominous background music. One person in particular became the center of attention, not because there was solid evidence, but because their timeline didn't sit right with people online, not wrong enough to arrest, just weird enough to obsess over, and that's all it takes, because weird becomes suspicious real fast when answers are scarce. And that person's life basically got nuked by speculation, harassed, threatened, analyzed down to body language and facial expressions, even though police never named them a suspect. And this is where the case took on a second layer of tragedy. Because while one person was missing, another was being slowly destroyed by rumors, and neither deserved it. Another theory leaned hard into opportunity crime. The idea that she crossed paths with someone she didn't know. Someone passing through, someone with no connection to her life. And that theory made people uneasy in a different way, because it meant there was no logic to follow. No warning signs to recognize. No lesson to learn other than, it can happen. And humans hate that. We want stories to have reasons, motives, villains with faces, not randomness, not chaos, not the idea that safety is sometimes just luck pretending to be control. Then came the theory that made police uncomfortable. The planned encounter. The idea that she left the house expecting to meet someone, not officially, not scheduled, but casually. Someone who knew exactly when she'd be alone, exactly where she'd be. Exactly how to approach her without raising alarms, and that theory explained too much to ignore. The lack of struggle, the speed, the silence, the missing digital trail. But it also opened a terrifying door, because it suggested the disappearance wasn't impulsive, it was engineered, and that's a whole different level of threat. Online investigators started mapping her routines with unsettling precision, pulling from old posts, photos, habits described by friends, and they noticed patterns that hadn't stood out before. Small things, tiny changes in behavior that didn't mean anything on their own, but together suggested someone might have been paying attention long before the day she vanished. And that raised a question nobody wanted to ask. Was she being watched? Not stalked in the obvious sense, but observed quietly, patiently. The way predators observe, waiting for the perfect moment, not because they're impulsive, but because they're methodical. Some theories went darker, involving cover-ups, corruption, evidence mishandling, and while most of those lacked proof, they didn't come from nowhere. Because there were documented mistakes, small ones but enough to shake confidence, delayed searches, overlooked tips, evidence logged late or not at all. And those errors, even if unintentional, became fuel for suspicion because when answers are missing, people assume they were taken, not lost. Then there was the theory nobody liked, not police, not family, not the public, but it lingered anyway. That she might have survived, not living a new life, not thriving, but trapped in circumstances worse than death. And that idea haunted people because it meant the story wasn't over. It was just paused, somewhere unseen. And every time a new tip came in claiming a sighting, hope and dread collided. Because finding her alive would be a miracle. But the question of what she endured would be unbearable. The internet didn't just theorize, it created narratives, full timelines, suspects, motives, alternate endings, and some of those narratives were compelling enough that people started believing them over official statements. Because belief doesn't require proof, it requires coherence. And these theories felt coherent in a way reality didn't. And that's dangerous because once a theory feels right, evidence becomes optional. Meanwhile, police quietly revisited the case, not publicly, not with press conferences, but internally, because cold cases never truly die, they just sleep. And sometimes a new set of eyes sees what others didn't. But even then, the same problem remained. No body, no crime scene, no weapon, no definitive proof that a crime even occurred, and without that, the justice system stalls because it's built on certainty, not intuition. Years after she disappeared, the case existed in two parallel worlds. One where detectives stared at the same files hoping for a break, and another where the public had already decided what happened, divided into camps, arguing online like the truth was a debate to be won, not a reality to be uncovered, and somewhere between those worlds was the real story. Still buried, still silent, still waiting for something, or someone, to bring it back into the light. And here's the thing nobody likes to admit. Some cases don't stay unsolved because they're impossible. They stay unsolved because the answer is too quiet, too ordinary, too uncomfortable to notice. And the longer this case went without resolution, the more it started to feel like that kind of story. One where the truth didn't scream, it whispered, and everyone was listening for the wrong sound. By the time investigators reached what would quietly become the final phase of this case, there was no dramatic announcement, no press conference, no breaking news banner scrolling across TV screens, just a slow, uncomfortable realization setting in behind closed doors that whatever happened to her wasn't going to announce itself. It wasn't going to fall into anyone's lap with a confession or a miracle discovery, and that realization forced detectives to confront the theory they hated the most. Not because it was wild or sensational, but because it was terrifyingly simple. That she disappeared because someone saw an opportunity and took it cleanly, efficiently, without emotion, without chaos, and without leaving enough behind to prove it ever happened. This theory didn't involve masterminds or elaborate conspiracies or secret double lives. It involved timing, familiarity, and the uncomfortable truth that crimes don't need drama to succeed. They need moments. And that moment may have lasted less than 60 seconds because if she stepped off her usual path just a little, if she paused to talk to someone she didn't see as a threat, if she trusted a face that felt normal enough not to fear, then everything that followed could have unfolded faster than the brain could process danger. And that's what makes this explanation so hard to swallow. It means there was no warning, no fighting chance, no heroic last stand, just a quiet transition from one state of being to another. Detectives revisited every overlooked detail with that mindset, not looking for something explosive, but for something subtle, something that didn't scream crime but whispered mistake. And one detail kept resurfacing, something so ordinary it had almost been dismissed entirely early on. The exact location where her scent trail ended, because it wasn't hidden, it wasn't remote, it was mundane, a place people passed every day without thinking twice. And that's when the implication hit hard. Whoever intervened didn't need secrecy, they needed confidence. The kind that comes from blending in, from not looking like a threat, from understanding that people don't question normal-looking situations. There was no evidence of panic, no signs she tried to run, no indication she sensed danger until it was too late. And that detail alone reshaped the entire emotional weight of the case because it meant fear didn't drive her last moments. Surprise did. And surprise is deadly, because it steals time, and time is the only thing that saves people in situations like this. As the years passed, investigators privately admitted something they would never say out loud. That if this theory was correct, the person responsible may never be identified. Not because they were smarter than the system, but because the system is built to catch noise, not silence, mistakes, not precision, chaos, not calm. And whoever did this didn't create chaos. They erased it. The case file thickened but went nowhere. Tips slowed to a trickle, then to almost nothing. And eventually the story stopped being about solving the mystery and started being about living with it. Because for her family, uncertainty became a permanent condition. A wound that never closed because it never got the chance to scar over. And for investigators, the case became a reminder that not every missing person leaves behind a trail. Some leave behind a void, and voids don't point in any direction. And here's the part that lingers long after the facts fade. Someone out there knows what happened, not in a vague cosmic sense, but literally, physically. There is at least one person walking around with the answer to this mystery stored inside their head, going to work, buying groceries, living a normal life, carrying a truth that could end decades of questions, and the fact that they've stayed silent this long means either they can't speak or they don't want to. There was no closure, no official conclusion, no line in the report that says case solved, just a status that still reads open, a word that sounds hopeful but really means unresolved, unfinished, suspended in time. And every year that passes without answers doesn't just make the case colder, it makes it quieter because people move on. Attention shifts and silence settles in like dust. But the story doesn't end there because cases like this don't really end at all. They echo, they live in routines, in locked doors, checked twice, in glances over shoulders, in the awareness that safety isn't guaranteed by familiarity, and that the most dangerous moments aren't always dramatic. Sometimes they look exactly like every other day. She walked out of her house expecting to come back, expecting the world to behave the way it always had, and the fact that it didn't is what makes this case so unsettling, because there was nothing special about that day until it became unforgettable. Nothing unusual about her decision until it erased her existence. And that's the warning buried inside this mystery. You don't need to do anything wrong to disappear. You just need to exist at the wrong moment in someone else's plan. And maybe the scariest part isn't that we don't know what happened to her. It's that if the truth ever does come out, it probably won't be shocking. It won't be cinematic. It won't feel like justice. It will feel small, ordinary, and cruel. And by then, it might be too late to matter. So the case remains open, not just in police files, but in the minds of everyone who's ever wondered how someone can vanish without a trace. And every time you walk out your front door without telling anyone exactly where you're going. Every time you assume normal equals safe. Remember this story, because somewhere between routine and trust is where mysteries like this are born. And sometimes they're never solved. If you had enjoyed this, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your friend and family. Signing out. Thank you. Write in comments about your thought. What would happen to her?